Expecting Keir Starmer, the UK Premier.
Yes, he's coming tonight.
What do you think of him? Some of his colleagues in government are quite critical of you.
Well, I'm going to see him in about an hour, so I have to be nice, right? Understand? He's done a poor job. Crime is up, a lot of problems. And I don't think he should be criticizing a representative of the United States that can do so much good for the United Kingdom. We talked about it before. But I actually think he's very nice. I think he ran a great race. He did very well. It's very early, but he's popular, and I'll be seeing him, and I'll send you regards.
Remember when everyone thought Keir Starmer was just another boring politician? Well, he's just proved us all wrong in the most spectacular way possible. By taking on Donald Trump, he's either signed his political death warrant or cemented his place in history. But here's what you really need to know. This isn't just about Starmer versus Trump. It's about the future of Britain and whether we'll have any friends left when the dust settles. Ready to find out what's really going on behind the headlines? Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great. Thank you so much. Now, back to the video. Keir Starmer's abrupt transition from wary critic to global contender caught many off guard. For many years, he had been presented as the epitome of cautious British politics.
I want to be clear at the outset, against the backdrop of these dangerous times, the idea that we must choose between our allies, I reject it utterly. Attlee did not choose between allies. Churchill did not choose. The national interest demands that we work with both. It's written not in some dry, dusty treaty, but in the ink of shared sacrifice.
His supporters praised his cool-headedness, while his critics claimed he lacked the courage to oppose the Conservatives. However, political analysts are baffled by what changed and why. It appears that Starmer's decision was influenced by Donald Trump's assertive foreign policy. As Trump put more pressure on friends to choose between the US and the EU, Starmer saw an opportunity to emphasize Britain's independence. It's a brave move, but people from all walks of life have surprisingly supported it. Even Starmer's most outspoken critics now back him. Despite his disagreements with Starmer, former Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn celebrated the ruling as a necessary stand for British sovereignty. Rory Stewart, a Republican senator, praised it as a rare moment of true leadership in these uncertain times. However, what specifically did Starmer say to Trump? In a speech that has since gone viral across the Atlantic, Starmer was direct. In his words, "Mr. Trump, Britain is not for sale. We will not be forced to choose between our European neighbors and our American friends. Washington's demands will not dictate our foreign policy. British interests will." Britain's reactions have been mixed, but usually positive. Starmer's newfound bravery has astonished many Britons, but according to a YouGov poll, 62% of them agree with him.
The Foreign Secretary and I did meet President-elect Trump just a few weeks ago for dinner for about a couple of hours, and we discussed a number of issues of global significance. It was a very constructive exercise, giving a masterclass on student politics. Seriously, Mr. Speaker, we live in probably a more volatile world than we've lived in for many decades.
Given that most of his cabinet signed a motion to ban President Trump from addressing Parliament, will the Prime Minister show that he and his government can be more than student politicians by asking you, Mr. Speaker?
On social media, Starmer's spine memes and hashtags have taken over. Trump's initial response has been remarkably muted. In his earlier tweets, he called Starmer a failed politician, but in his most recent ones, he has not named the Labour leader. Trump's relative silence on the subject has led some to believe that he is truly concerned about upsetting a valuable friend. Starmer's stakes are high. By challenging Trump, he puts the UK's friendship with its most powerful ally in jeopardy. Trade agreements, intelligence sharing, and military cooperation are all potentially at risk. But Starmer seems to be betting that fighting Trump will eventually help his own political career and Britain's standing internationally. Starmer's resistance to Trump garnered media attention, but it was only the start. Beneath the surface is a far more dangerous political landscape. As Britain becomes caught up in a high-stakes international chess match, one mistake might spell doom. Can Starmer effectively negotiate the US and EU without endangering the interests of the UK? Trump's ultimatum to world leaders has left the diplomatic community in a state of chaos. His assertion that there is no middle ground, no wiggle room between the US and Europe, has put nations like Britain in an impossible predicament. Simply choosing a side is insufficient. You also need to navigate a complicated web of interests and alliances. This issue is particularly urgent for the British government. The UK is working very hard to establish its own place in the global arena after Brexit.
This is not about sentimentality. It's about hard-headed realism. Time and again, the best hope for the world and the surest way to serve our mutual national interest. Our leadership in tech, in AI and more, they're intertwined. And our security is also intertwined. And we will rebuild our ties with Europe too. The future of freedom in Europe is being decided today. We face a near and present danger.
Despite its special relationship with the United States, how can it prevent jealousy among its European neighbors? By refusing to comply with Trump's demands, Starmer is displaying both great bravery and recklessness. The Brexit aspect adds even more complexity. There was optimism that Britain's departure from the EU would signal the start of a more independent and powerful era for the nation. Instead, it has increased the country's vulnerability to threats from the other side of the Atlantic. Despite possible home support, Starmer's stance could jeopardize important trade deals that the UK needs to succeed in the international market. The history of British resistance to superpowers is lengthy and illustrious. Assuring the audience that the British government has never had to pick between friends, Starmer skillfully brought it up in his speech. But how much does this resemble previous earlier rebellions? Or is Starmer exaggerating? Never before have there been such high economic stakes. Becoming overly dependent on the United States might harm Britain's relationship with the European Union and put trade agreements that are vital to the post-Brexit economy at risk. But if you ignore Trump, Washington might strike back, which might affect military cooperation and information exchange, among other things. It is hard to overlook NATO's role in this political chess game when talking about military matters. Because of the continued crisis in Ukraine, Britain has decided to support military help, putting it in direct conflict with Russia. This complicates Starmer's efforts to balance the interests of the US and the EU. The way the world has reacted to Britain's stance is complicated. Some nations see Starmer's lack of loyalty to be a courageous and self-reliant deed. Some interpret it as an indication of unpredictability that would weaken Britain's influence internationally. Depending on this risky investment, Britain's reputation could improve or deteriorate. Starmer seems to be taking a third-way stance in an effort to steer clear of the divisive US-EU dispute. It could out to be a very profitable or devastating action, depending on the outcome. By adamantly declaring Britain's independence, the Labour leader is putting his faith in his ability to guide the nation through these dangerous times. However, given the Trump administration's notorious dislike of apparent neutrality, Starmer would face very choppy waters. As Starmer's audacious declaration gains traction, the UK is faced with a variety of potential situations. The best scenario would be for Britain to establish itself as a respected mediator between global powers, leveraging its unique location to promote cooperation between nations. However, the worst-case scenario paints a grim picture. The UK is economically destroyed and walled off from the rest of the globe due to conflicts between American and European interests. The current situation raises a broader question about the role of intermediate states in the geopolitical environment. Can countries like Britain, which are sandwiched between two superpowers, truly carve out their own way? There isn't a straightforward answer. Although Starmer's refusal to back down shows a desire to protect British interests, the UK may have restricted options because of economic and military ties. Regardless of the outcome, Starmer's action will be a watershed in world politics. By doing thus, it challenges the notion that weaker states ought to obediently submit to the wishes of more powerful ones. As other countries re-evaluate their positions in reaction, the outcome could be a change in the balance of power and global allegiances.